Welcome to the Quantanix YouTube channel. This is the NextLayer podcast, episode 4. Today, we're diving deep into a question that's becoming increasingly vital in our tech-driven world: human versus machine, the enduring differences.
Absolutely. And it's really about looking beyond, the headlines about AI breakthroughs. We want to get into what truly distinguishes our intelligence from machine intelligence.
Exactly. Think of this as your express route to a more nuanced understanding of this whole fascinating area. We've looked through a range of sources, different perspectives on what makes human and machine intelligence unique. Our goal today isn't just to list features, but really to illuminate the fundamental distinctions.
Yeah, our mission in this deep dive is to move past those maybe more superficial comparisons. We want to unpack the inherent characteristics, the things that define human intelligence, especially in contrast to even the most sophisticated AI we see now. We're aiming for clarity and hopefully some of those surprising aha moments for you.
Okay, so let's start at the foundational level. The sources point to some really striking architectural differences, how we're built versus how machines are.
Right. And what's immediately apparent is that contrast between biological systems these things evolved over billions of years and digital systems, which, well, humans designed relatively recently.
Huge difference in origin.
Exactly. And think about the human brain. It's a network of roughly 86 billion neurons, trillions of connections. This complex web enables not just consciousness and emotion, but also that higher order thinking, all sculpted by, the pressures of survival.
Right. And then you've got the digital machine. It's operating on binary code, executing algorithms, following programmed logic. It's incredibly powerful for specific tasks like computation, but it's just a fundamentally different setup.
And the efficiency difference is just, well, it's remarkable. The human brain, it runs on about 20 watts of power.
20 watts, that's tiny.
It is, especially when you consider it's tackling cognitive tasks that would need immense energy resources for even the most advanced AI to simulate. It just speaks volumes about the optimization that happened through evolution.
It really does. And that brings up this idea of integration, right?
Yeah.
The human brain is constantly pulling together information from our senses, our memories, emotions, social cues, leading to this really integrated, nuanced understanding of the world.
Mm-hmm. And machines, even the ones with really sophisticated sensors, they still face huge challenges in replicating that seamless interconnectedness, that constant synthesis.
Which seem to lead us right into the neurobiological basis of consciousness.
Yeah.
Our sources flag this as a really critical point of divergence.
Absolutely. What's key here, according to the neuroscience perspective in our material, is the thalamocortical system. It's seen as central to conscious awareness, at least in mammals. And current AI, it just doesn't have a comparable neurobiological structure, nothing like it.
So even if an AI, like some of these large language models, generates text that sounds really thoughtful, maybe even conscious,
Right, it can seem that way.
the underlying reality, neurologically speaking, is vastly different. They lack that fundamental biological framework that many neuroscientists think is necessary for genuine consciousness.
Yeah.
It's more like mimicry, maybe, without the actual subjective experience behind it.
Precisely. That's a good way to put it. And if you look at it from an evolutionary angle, our consciousness likely evolved through natural selection. Why? Because being aware, having subjective experiences, probably offered real advantages for survival and reproduction. It's intrinsically linked to our sense of agency, too, our ability to make choices based on how we feel, what we think.
Okay, this brings us to another really fascinating distinction I saw mentioned: embodied versus disembodied processing. This really clicked for me as fundamental.
Oh, yeah, it's a big one. What's so interesting is how deeply our thoughts and perceptions are intertwined with our physical bodies or sensory experiences. Think about understanding something like cold. It's not just a data point, like a temperature reading.
No, it's a feeling.
It's a physical sensation, right? A shiver, that feeling on your skin. That's embodied cognition. Our understanding of the world is literally grounded in our physical existence.
Yeah, that visceral lived experience.
Yeah.
And the sources point out that AI operates with, well, disembodied data.
It doesn't have that same physical grounding.
Okay.
One source put it like, AI inputs lack the embodied, embedded information typical of our sensory interaction with the world.
Okay, so what's the implication of that?
Well, a key implication is this fundamental limitation for machines in truly understanding concepts that are deeply rooted in physical sensations. And crucially, emotions, which are so often tied to our bodily states, are physiology.
Let's dive a bit deeper then into consciousness itself and perception. How do the sources define human consciousness?
At its core, human consciousness is described as, well, awareness. Awareness of ourselves, our inner thoughts, feelings, and the environment around us. It includes our subjective experiences, what it feels like to be us, and our ability to reflect on our own mental states. Neurobiologically, it seems to be the result of integrated activity across many different brain regions working together.
And this is where that hard problem of consciousness comes in, isn't it? The mystery of how physical brain stuff creates our subjective inner world.
Exactly. It's a huge philosophical and scientific challenge. And that's where this idea of qualia becomes relevant. Qualia refers to those unique first-person experiences of sensations. The specific redness of red you see, the taste of coffee, the feeling of pain. These are subjective qualities that seem fundamentally inaccessible to machines, which just process information as data points like wavelengths or chemical compounds.
So an AI can analyze the data for the color blue, maybe identify it perfectly, but it doesn't have the experience of blueness like we do. And even when AI seems aware, the sources urge caution, suggesting it's likely not the same thing at all.
Right. And this difference also shapes perception itself. Humans have this incredibly integrated sensory system. Our sight, sound, touch, taste, smell, they constantly interact, creating a unified, rich experience at the moment. Machines typically process different data streams, visual, auditory, text, often more separately, more siloed.
It's like our brain is creating this holistic picture, blending everything together and filtering it through our memories and emotions. It's not just processing raw data. It's about generating meaning,
What?
significance.
Precisely. An AI processing the light wavelengths of a beautiful sunset is doing something fundamentally different from a human experiencing the awe, the beauty, maybe the memories triggered by that same sunset.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit to learning and adaptation. The sources highlight some really crucial distinctions here, too. Human learning seems deeper.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. What's striking is that human learning isn't just about, acquiring new facts or skills. It can fundamentally change who we are. As one source puts it, learning results in change, particularly in the learner. We integrate new knowledge in a way that can actually restructure our understanding, impact our beliefs, our behaviors, our whole perspective.
So it's not just adding data to a database, it's more like a personal transformation sometimes.
Exactly. Compare that with machine learning. It's incredibly powerful, don't get me wrong, but it primarily revolves around statistical pattern recognition and accumulating vast amounts of data. It gets better at tasks, but it's more about refining its model based on data. One source said, the cyclical process merely accumulates more information. It doesn't typically involve that deep personal change.
And what about applying knowledge? Humans seem pretty good at taking something learned in one context and using it somewhere totally different.
Right, that contextual transfer. We can grasp a principle in, say, physics, and then apply it to understand something in biology or even social dynamics. We generate insights across domains. The sources suggest human learning excels when it connects classroom knowledge to real-world scenarios, making it incredibly flexible. Machines often struggle with this kind of broad transfer unless they're specifically designed and trained for it. Their learning can be quite brittle, context-dependent.
And the role of emotion in our learning. It feels important, like being engaged, interested.
Definitely. We tend to learn more effectively when we're emotionally invested, when we actively practice, reflect, connect it to our own experiences. Motivation plays a huge role. Human learning is often driven by intrinsic curiosity, a genuine desire to understand or master something. Machine training, while effective for its purpose, is fundamentally about adjusting parameters in an algorithm based on feedback signals. It lacks that internal human drive.
That makes sense. And it leads us naturally into emotional intelligence and experience, which feels like a really strong candidate for a key human edge.
It certainly seems that way. What's essential to grasp is just how complex human emotions are. They involve subjective feelings, yes, but also cognitive interpretations, how we think about a situation, plus physiological responses, behavioral expressions, and they're rooted in our biology, our evolutionary history.
You mean things like joy, sadness, anger, fear?
Yeah.
They aren't just abstract concepts. They involve neurochemicals, hormones, physical sensations in our bodies.
Exactly. And while AI has gotten quite good at detecting emotional cues, analyzing facial expressions, tone of voice,
Right, I've seen demos of that.
the sources emphasize this as pattern recognition. It's identifying correlations. It's not subjective experience. The AI can identify sadness cues, but it doesn't feel sad.
Big difference. And human emotions are so tangled up, aren't they? With our physical state, memories, thoughts, even our culture influences how we express or interpret emotion.
Absolutely. It's a rich, complex tapestry. And something like empathy, that ability to truly understand and share the feelings of another person, seems particularly difficult for AI to genuinely replicate. It requires that shared subjective space.
And how do emotions connect to things like values?
While our emotions are often deeply tied to our values, they motivate us, guide our actions, tell us what matters. AI can be programmed with ethical rules or guidelines, sure, but it lacks that intrinsic emotional investment in those principles. It follows the code, but it doesn't care in the human sense.
Okay, let's explore another area often held up as uniquely human: creativity and innovation.
Right, and what's fascinating here is the source of human creativity. It seems to bubble up from this interplay of our lived experiences, our emotions, our cultural knowledge, our cognitive processes. And often it's fueled by some kind of intrinsic motivation, a desire to express something meaningful, solve a personal puzzle, communicate an emotional truth.
And it's not always logical, right? The sources mention both those sudden unconscious aha moments and the more deliberate conscious effort involved in creative work.
Exactly, that dual nature. Now, contrast that with AI-generated content. The sources generally suggest that AI creativity combines ideas in novel ways based on training data but lacks true originality. It's essentially remixing and recombining patterns it learned from the vast amounts of data it was trained on. It doesn't have the lived experience or the emotional understanding that often sparks human invention.
The why is different too, isn't it? Humans often create for personal satisfaction, communication. Machines create because they get a prompt, a programmed goal.
Precisely. And there's also that embodied aspect again. Think of creativity in dance, music performance, painting. It's influenced by physical sensations, motor skills, the feel of the instrument or the brush. That's absent in purely digital processes.
Good point. And culture.
Culture profoundly shapes human creativity. Traditions, symbols, shared narratives. They provide a rich context that influences art, music, writing. Machines can process cultural data, identify patterns, but they don't experience culture or its meaning in the same embedded way. And human innovation often comes from identifying needs through direct experience or making unexpected connections across different fields, something that might be harder for an AI working within more defined parameters.
This feels connected to the broader social and cultural dimensions of being human, which seem woven into pretty much everything we've discussed.
Absolutely. What's crucial here is that human social development is fundamentally embodied and experiential. It's messy, it's real-time. We learn by interacting face-to-face, interpreting subtle nonverbal cues, navigating complex relationships. We develop our social identity alongside our individual sense of self through these interactions.
And the sources really emphasize how our identities are tied to this. One quote was, "Uniqueness is your social identity combined with your self-identity."
Exactly. Machines can simulate social interactions based on programmed rules and pattern recognition from data, but they lack that integrated social and emotional development that comes from years of real-world human connection. And think about the depth of human social bonds, care, commitment, shared history, trust built over time. These are incredibly complex phenomena, hard for current AI to truly replicate.
And we're just soaked in culture, aren't we? Absorbing shared meanings, values, norms. It shapes how we see the world, how we behave, gives us frameworks for interpretation.
Definitely. Even our attitudes, our likes, dislikes, opinions are heavily shaped through social learning and cultural context. This ties into identity formation again. The sources highlight how every person is born unique, develop their own quirks, perceptions, passions, and talents. This is an organic process, integrating genetics, life experiences, relationships, culture. It's quite different from how machines are simply customized or configured with specific data or parameters.
Okay, one last major area: moral and ethical frameworks. This feels particularly complex when comparing humans and AI.
It really is. What's fascinating about human moral development is how it evolves. We might start with basic gut feelings about fairness or harm, but it develops into more complex understanding. It involves learning to consider different perspectives, integrating abstract principles, and it relies on both emotional responses and rational reflection.
And there's that embodied element again, right? Those gut reactions: disgust at injustice, empathy for suffering, anger at betrayal. They often provide a powerful motivation for moral action.
Exactly. Now, machine ethics, as it stands today, is essentially programmed ethics. It's based on specified principles, rules, decision trees given to it by humans. It lacks those embodied emotional responses and the long developmental history, both individual and cultural, that shapes human morality. Our values and emotions are so deeply intertwined with our moral compass, driving our actions in a way that simulated adherence in an AI just doesn't seem to capture.
And what about moral agency? The ability to make free choices and be held responsible.
That seems intrinsically linked to consciousness and autonomy, which, as we've discussed, remain significant question marks for current AI. It's hard to attribute true moral agency to a system that lacks genuine understanding or subjective experience. Plus, human morality is profoundly shaped by culture traditions, narratives, mentors, shared values, not just lines of code or abstract parameters.
So looking ahead, where does this leave us? Machines are obviously advancing incredibly fast.
No question. They already exceed human capabilities in many specific domains: complex games, analyzing massive data sets, image recognition, language translation, even detecting those emotional cues we talked about.
But it sounds like those fundamental aspects of human uniqueness are likely to endure, at least for the foreseeable future.
That seems to be the consensus from our sources. Things like genuine consciousness and subjective experience, that qualia. Also, our capacity for truly transformative learning that changes who we are. And our collaborative potential, grounded in emotional intelligence and shared understanding. Our unique brand of creativity born from lived experience. And our complex, evolving moral landscapes.
So perhaps it's less about replacement and more about augmentation.
Exactly. The sources suggest a future where humans and machines increasingly augment each other's strengths, rather than a simple scenario where one replaces the other. This allows us to leverage AI's processing power while focusing on our distinctively human contributions. And this has big implications, right? For education, maybe we need to emphasize emotional intelligence, creative thinking, critical reasoning, moral understanding even more. And for technology development, focusing on human-centered design that complements our abilities, not just tries to mimic them.
Okay, so just to quickly recap this deep dive, we've touched on the fundamental differences in architecture, evolved biology versus designed digital systems.
Right, and the nature of consciousness, subjective experience, qualia, the neurobiological basis versus sophisticated mimicry in AI.
Then the processes of learning, transformative personal change in humans versus data accumulation and pattern matching in machines.
The role of emotions, deep, embodied, subjective experiences guiding human values and behavior versus pattern recognition or simulation in AI.
Creativity, too, arising from experience, emotion, culture, intrinsic motivation for us versus recombination of data for machines.
And our deep social and cultural embeddedness shaping identity and understanding contrasted with program simulation.
And finally, those complex, evolving, embodied moral frameworks in humans versus programmed ethics in AI.
And through all that, it seems the enduring significance really lies in human consciousness, our embodied cognition, that transformative learning, and our deeply ingrained social and cultural nature. These seem foundational.
So ultimately, it looks less like a direct competition, maybe, and more like a recognition of complementary strengths. Human intelligence and machine intelligence are just different kinds of things.
Which points towards a future of collaboration, hopefully leveraging the best of both.
Okay, so here's a final thought for you, our listener, to ponder. How might really understanding these fundamental differences, the things that make us uniquely human, shape how you interact with technology day to day? And maybe how might it deepen your appreciation for the richness and complexity of what it actually means to be human, especially as we navigate this increasingly AI-driven world? What are the implications for society?
Lots to think about there.
Definitely. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the enduring differences between humans and machines. If you found this insightful, please do like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more deep dives on the NextLayer podcast at the Quantanix YouTube channel.